Moving into a new neighborhood always comes with that mix of excitement and uncertainty, especially when the place has history. Sarah and Mark had heard the stories about their new street, old houses, quiet winters, and neighbors who rarely showed themselves. But that was exactly what they wanted after months of city noise. Then came the invitation. A simple handwritten note slipped under their door one chilly evening. Holiday party at the corner house tonight. Come join us. Warm drinks, good company. It was signed simply, The Watchers. Weird name, they thought, but something about it felt oddly inviting. They decided to go. After all, it was just a neighborly gathering. When they arrived, the house looked like it belonged on a Christmas card. Strings of lights flickered softly through frosted windows, wreaths hung on every door, and the snowmen in the yard smiled invitingly. But as they stepped closer, Sarah noticed something off. The ornaments hanging from the trees didn't sparkle in the usual way. They glinted, but not with light. They almost seemed alive. Inside, the warmth and laughter seemed genuine at first. People mingled, sharing stories over mugs of cocoa and mulled wine. But Sarah's unease grew. She caught herself scanning the room and realized the decorations, the snowmen in particular, weren't made of snow. Their eyes, glassy and unnervingly sharp, seemed fixed directly on her and Mark, no matter where they moved. Then Mark whispered, "Do you see that? The eyes in the snowmen's heads, they're moving." Sarah didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was the flickering candlelight playing tricks, but the realization hit like a cold breath down the neck. These weren't decorations. They were watching. Every eye-shaped bauble and every painted snowman face was a pair of unblinking, observing eyes. Not just on the snowmen outside. Throughout the room, the ornaments hanging from the ceiling and the garlands all watched them. The partygoers laughed and chatted, seemingly oblivious to the creeping terror Sarah and Mark felt. That's when Sarah noticed something else. None of the guests actually touched the decorations. They moved only between rooms, careful to avoid breaking the line of sight from those strange eyes. "We need to get out," Mark said quietly, pulling on Sarah's arm. But as they turned to leave, a heavy door slammed somewhere inside the house. The lights flickered, and when they steadied again, the crowd was gone. The warmth vanished into cold silence. Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in. The eyes, they weren't just watching. The feeling was unmistakable. This house, this neighborhood, collected watchers. Not friendly neighbors, predators disguised behind holiday cheer. Sarah spotted a small window behind the curtains, just cracked open. It would be their chance. But the room felt bigger than before, the shadows deeper, and the eyes in the ornaments darting with impatience. They crawled toward the window, careful not to breathe too heavily, not to make a sound. As Mark pried the window open wider, a sudden noise made Sarah freeze. A low, whispering hum, almost like voices carried on the icy wind outside. The snowmen's eyes glinted sharply, reflecting something darker than glass. hungering. Then a weight pressed on her shoulder, and she spun around, heart searing through her ribs. But there was no one, just a snowman's crooked twig arm pointed accusingly at the door, and from beneath the coat Sarah glimpsed dozens of tiny glassy eyes blinking in unison. "Run," Mark hissed, yanking her toward the opening. Without looking back, they slipped through the window, landing hard on the snowy ground. Outside, the street was empty, save for those silent watchers in the yards, the snowmen and the ornaments on the trees, all facing the house they'd just fled. Something in the air told them the horror wasn't just confined to that party, not just a creepy prank. It was the neighborhood itself, an ancient, cold sentinel that didn't welcome strangers easily. The watchers were patient, waiting for the next unwary visitors to fall under their gaze. Breath ragged, Sarah looked at Mark and said, "We can't go back there, not ever." Mark nodded, eyes scanning the silent street. "We survive by moving, by never standing still long enough to be watched." They walked away from the glowing windows and the chilling holiday lights behind them, but the feeling lingered, the eyes following, waiting, winter's cruel guardians who never blinked. And somewhere deep in the neighborhood, the watchers began setting new eyes in the trees, one ornament at a time, waiting for the next curious arrival.
Hello guys, welcome to my new video. Without wasting any time, let's get started. The lighthouse keeper vanished, but why? Before I tell you what happened at Wraith Point, you need to understand one thing. The investigation team kept saying the same sentence. No human being could have disappeared like this. They weren't exaggerating. They weren't being dramatic. They were terrified. What I'm about to describe isn't a legend or a sailor's tale. It's the last documented days of Elias Crane, the man assigned to maintain a lighthouse that had been shut down for 27 years. A lighthouse the locals warned him never to stay in after dark. Elias was a practical man, a former maritime surveyor who believed in charts, maps, machines, nothing supernatural. When he first stepped onto the island, the fog felt unusually dense, curling around his boots like something alive, but he ignored it. He assumed the stories about Wraith Point were just old fishermen trying to scare away trespassers. Yet, from the first night, the place felt wrong. The walls didn't hum like they should. It breathed. The walls seemed to expand and contract with the rhythm of the waves, as if the entire structure had a pulse. The logs from the previous keeper were missing, except for a single torn page left on the floor. It does not stand alone. Elias assumed it was poetic nonsense, but he should have taken it literally. Inside the lighthouse, the air carried a metallic tang, like rust mixed with seawater, and every sound echoed for too long, as if the tower repeated noises after hearing them. When Elias walked, he heard a second pair of footsteps, barely out of sync with his own. When he whispered to himself, The lighthouse whispered back, fractions of a second later, repeating the tail end of his sentences in a tone slightly deeper than his. By the third night, the isolation began gnawing at him. The radio transmitted faint static even when unplugged, and the generator flickered randomly, despite being fully functional. Then came the noises outside. Not wind, not waves, knocking. Not at the door, but from the outside walls, at least 30 feet above ground, where no person could reach without climbing gear. Slow, deliberate knocks circling the tower late every night, like something was pacing around the lighthouse on invisible stilts. Elias tried to ignore it until the knocking began responding to him. When he tapped the wall nervously one night, the knocking answered. Same rhythm, same number of taps, just harder, heavier, as if mocking him. On the fifth night, a dense fog swallowed the island entirely. Elias couldn't see more than an arm's length outside the lighthouse door. He lit the beacon manually, expecting nothing, but the light stopped moving. It aimed itself downward, pointing directly at the rocks by the shoreline, as if the lighthouse was staring at something. Elias leaned out the top window and squinted through the fog. That's when he saw a figure standing by the shore, a tall, motionless silhouette facing the sea, limbs wrong, proportions stretched. Elias called out, thinking it was someone in trouble, but the figure didn't turn. It didn't move at all until the lighthouse flickered. Then its head slowly twisted upward toward him, bending further than a human neck should. Elias jerked back from the window, heart hammering. When he dared to look again, the figure was gone. By the seventh night, the inside of the lighthouse changed, not visibly, structurally. The stairs creaked in places they never creaked before. The walls felt damp even without rain, and sometimes when Elias pressed his ear against certain sections, he could hear something behind them, like the sound of someone else breathing. He wrote in his log that he felt followed inside a building with no one else in it. At 2:17 a.m., the radio sparked to life without power, playing a faint recording of Elias's own voice saying, "I'm not alone in here," even though he had never recorded anything. He smashed the radio in panic, but the broken device whispered one final phrase as it died. "You shouldn't have looked at it." Elias barely slept after that. The real horror began on the 10th night. Elias awoke to the sound of footsteps on the floor above him, slow, dragging steps, like someone was moving with uneven legs. He grabbed a lantern and climbed the stairs, calling out shakily, "Who's there?" No answer, just the creaking of old wood and a faint wet sound, like dripping seawater. When he reached the top level, he saw footprints across the floor, long, narrow, waterlogged footprints, and they led to the wall, not the doorway, as if someone had walked into the wall and disappeared. Elias touched the damp footprints. They were cold as ice and smelled like the open ocean. He bolted downstairs, barricaded the door, and didn't sleep at all. The next day, he discovered the old logs he thought were missing, shoved under his bed. Every entry ended the same way. It wants the keeper. On the 12th night, a storm hit, violent, unnatural, with lightning that didn't flash but flickered like a faulty bulb. Elias sat at the desk, gripping his journal, when he heard a soft humming,
not from the wind, not from the ocean, but from inside the room. He turned slowly. There was someone sitting in the chair opposite him, a figure hunched forward, drenched head to toe, its head lowered so Elias couldn't see its face. He whispered, trembling, "Who are you?" The figure lifted its head. It was not Elias. It was Elias, but soaked, pale, eyes milky white, skin wrinkled and swollen, like something that had been underwater too long. The drenched version of him opened its mouth, and seawater spilled out before it spoke in his exact voice. "You're late." The lantern shattered when Elias dropped it. When he scrambled backward, the waterlogged version of him dissolved into a spreading puddle that seeped into the cracks of the floor, disappearing entirely. By now, Elias knew he couldn't stay another night. He gathered his things, waited for dawn, but dawn didn't come.
Like and subscribe
The
to
sky
our
lightened slightly, but the sun never rose. Time felt wrong on the island. The hours stretched unnaturally. No boats arrived. No radio signals worked, as if Wraith Point had been removed from the world entirely. On what he believed was his 15th day, Elias heard something that froze his blood. Someone knocking gently on the lighthouse door from the inside. He backed into a corner as the knocks traveled up the interior walls, climbing toward the ceiling. Then, above him, he heard soft footsteps pacing in circles, exactly like the knocks had done outside during his first nights. That evening the storm returned. Elias lit every lantern he had, but the light barely pierced the darkness. Shadows moved when nothing was standing. The lighthouse groaned like something was pushing against its outer walls. Elias wrote frantically in his logbook, "It's inside the walls. It's copying me. It's waiting." Lightning struck the tower, shaking the island. The floor trembled, and then the final thing he wrote, scribbled so violently the pen tore the paper. "If I vanish, it won't be me they find." That was the last entry. 2 days later, when the supply boat finally reached Wraith Point, the lighthouse was quiet. The door was locked from the outside. No signs of struggle, no footprints on the sand, but the beacon was running. The officials climbed the tower and found Elias standing at the top, facing the sea, perfectly dry, perfectly still, except he didn't blink once during the entire interaction. And when they spoke his name, he turned with a smile stretched just
a little too wide, and said in a tone slightly lower than Elias's usual voice, "I kept the light on." They brought him back to the mainland, relieved until they realized the real Elias Crane's body, washed ashore 3 days later, bloated, waterlogged, and dead long before they ever rescued the thing that now wore his face.
In August 2016, in North London, 26-year-old Kennedy Ife began acting strange and aggressive following a pain in his throat. He reportedly bit his father, threatened to cut off his own penis, and complained of a python or snake inside of him before his family restrained him to a bed with cable ties and excessive force. The August heat in North London clung to the walls like sweat, but inside the Ife household, the air felt unnaturally cold, as if something unseen had been breathing through the rooms for days. It began when Kennedy Ife woke in the middle of the night, clutching his throat, insisting that something alive was moving beneath his skin. At first, it sounded like delirium, a simple fever, the family thought. But then his voice changed. It dropped into a tone so deep and dry that it rasped through the house like sandpaper. By the second day, the family found him standing motionless in the hallway, shoulders twisted, eyes wide open but unfocused, whispering as if speaking to someone standing inches away from him. He refused to blink, even when his mother shook him. Then he screamed without warning, a long, violent roar, and bit into his own hand so hard that it tore the skin. His father tried to restrain him, but Kennedy spun with sudden strength, sinking his teeth into his father's shoulder and snapping at anyone who approached. He shouted that something was inside him, something long and coiled. He kept clawing at his stomach as though he could pull it out with his bare hands. At one point, he threatened to mutilate himself and demanded a knife, insisting that the serpent in his body would not stop until it fed on the rest of the family. The house filled with the sound of frantic prayers. The brothers tried to calm him, but every time they touched him, his body jerked violently as if reacting to electricity. For 3 days, the family witnessed Kennedy change into something they no longer recognized. He spoke of doors opening by themselves in his room. He said he could hear footsteps circling his bed, even when everyone was downstairs. He complained that the serpent inside him kept tightening around his lungs. At night, they heard him chanting in a language no one in the house knew. The family finally tied him to the bed with cable ties because he kept trying to break the windows with his head. He screamed at nothing. He stared at the ceiling. He begged someone invisible to let him breathe again. His voice chipped away into a hollow whisper that sounded too old to belong to a 26-year-old man. His chest rose and fell too quickly, as if something inside was feeding off his breath. His brothers took shifts watching him, each hour feeling like a lifetime. Kennedy begged for water, yet refused to swallow when offered. He said something was crawling up his throat and he didn't want it escaping. They saw his eyes roll back until only the whites remained. They heard him laugh at odd intervals, a broken sound that echoed through the house like a child crying in an empty church. Even the neighbors claimed they heard voices at night, more than one, although only one person was tied to the bed. On the third night, he whispered to his youngest brother, asking him to untie him because he could see their dead grandmother standing behind him. The brother looked behind himself and saw nothing. When he turned back, Kennedy's head had twisted at an unnatural angle, his grin wide and still. The brother ran from the room,
By morning,
shaking.
Kennedy's breathing had become strained. Each inhale followed by a rattling noise, as if thick liquid was moving inside his lungs. The family finally panicked and called for help, insisting he was dehydrated. But when paramedics arrived, the house felt wrong. There was a smell in the air, not decay, but something raw and metallic, heavy like old blood. Kennedy lay tied to the bed, his skin cold, his lips turning blue. When the paramedics tried to touch him, his body jerked violently as if some force resisted them. His chest trembled, his back arched. For a moment, his eyes opened with frightening clarity, and he looked at them with an expression that was not fear, but awareness, as though he were seeing something behind them that they could never understand. Then his breathing stopped. The room fell silent. The brothers tried to revive him, chanting frantically. One brother even climbed onto the bed and pressed his hands to Kennedy's chest, whispering prayers in a trembling voice, begging whatever remained to return. Witnesses described his whispers slowing, then growing deeper until it felt like someone else was praying through him. The temperature of the room dropped so quickly that one of the paramedics swore he saw his breath fog the air. Kennedy's body convulsed once, violently enough to rattle the bed frame, and then he went still. At 10:17 a.m., Kennedy Ife was declared dead. But the horror inside the house did not leave with him. Officers arriving to investigate reported a thick tension in the hallway, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Every family member showed injuries ranging from scratches to bite marks. They insisted the wounds came from restraining him, yet some marks were too deep, too precise, almost as if made by something with sharper teeth than his own. A post-mortem later revealed over 60 wounds on Kennedy's body, many inflicted long before he died, though no one could explain why some bruises formed patterns that resembled handprints too small to be any of theirs. The youngest brother claimed the nights after his death were filled with tapping sounds along the walls, soft but constant, like fingernails dragging across wood. Another brother claimed he woke to the sound of choking coming from the empty bedroom where Kennedy had died. Even after the family was acquitted in court, the story continued to circulate among neighbors. Lights flickered inside the house at strange hours. People swore they heard someone whispering behind the front door when no one was home. Months later, a new tenant moved into the room where Kennedy had died and left the house within 48 hours. He said he couldn't sleep because it felt like someone was standing over him, watching him struggle to breathe. He claimed he woke to the sensation of something cold pressed against his throat, as though something long and unseen was trying to crawl from his body the same way Kennedy once described. To this day, no one in the neighborhood talks about the Ife house late at night because too many swear they hear a faint dragging sound coming from the upper floor. Some say it's the restless spirit of the young man who died in his own bedroom. Others whisper that whatever Kennedy claimed lived inside him never left at all. It simply waits in the quiet, searching for another warm body to fill.